wasn't supposed to find the dog. He was supposed to drive past. It was a November morning on the outskirts of Petawawa, the kind of morning that arrives without ceremony. Gray sky pressed flat against gray road, frost still holding on the shoulder where the gravel met frozen mud. Garrison Holt had been driving that same stretch of County Road 26 for 3 years, ever since he moved into the old place after Joanna died, and all that time nothing had ever made him stop. Not the deer, not the foxes in October. Not even the morning a barn owl sat on a fence post, so close he could have touched it through the open window. But that morning something made him stop. It was not a sound he could have named clearly. More of a shape at the edge of his headlights, low to the ground, not moving the way an animal moves when it still has somewhere to go. He pulled the truck onto the shoulder and sat for a moment with the engine running, both hands still on the wheel. Garrison Holt was not a man who rushed toward things. 15 years as a Navy SEAL had cured him of that particular impulse, the one that mistakes speed for courage. He had learned the difference between the two in places he did not speak about anymore. He got out. The dog was lying on its side in a shallow ditch, its black and brown coat nearly invisible against the dark soil. A young German shepherd, 8, maybe 10 weeks old, shaking so hard Garrison could see it from 3 feet away. One back leg was held at an angle that should not have been possible. Around its neck, a piece of orange baling twine had been looped twice and tied into a knot that someone had clearly pulled tight. The other end of the twine was frayed clean through, as though the dog had been dragging something heavy and finally torn free. Or been torn free by something else. Garrison crouched down on one knee. The dog turned its head and looked at him. It did not growl. It did not try to crawl away. It just looked at him with that particular expression that dogs have sometimes. Not pleading, not afraid, just completely, devastatingly present. As though it had already accepted everything that had happened and was only waiting to see what came next. "All right," Garrison said. He took off his barn jacket and wrapped the dog inside it, careful with the leg, and carried it back to the truck. The vet clinic in Petawawa opened at 8. He sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes, with the dog on the seat beside him, one hand resting lightly on its ribs so he could feel it breathing. The dog had stopped shaking by then. It had pressed its nose into the space between his thigh and the seat and gone very still. Dr. Yoon came out to meet him at the door when he knocked. He was a small woman in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the unhurried manner of someone who has seen every kind of trouble an animal can arrive in. She looked at the dog, then at Garrison, then at the piece of orange twine he was still holding in his other hand. "Come in," she said. The leg was fractured. A clean break, she told him, which was the best kind if you had to have one. The twine had left a raw band around the neck, but had not damaged anything deeper. Malnourished, dehydrated, but not broken in the way that didn't heal. "He's lucky," Dr. Ewan said. She was filling a syringe with something pale. "Another night out there and the cold would have been the end of it." Garrison nodded. He was standing against the wall with his arms crossed, in the way he always stood in rooms where he didn't know what was expected of him. "You keeping him?" The question landed in the room and stayed there. Garrison looked at the dog. The dog was watching the syringe with focused, intelligent eyes. It had not made a single sound since he picked it up. "I don't know," Garrison said. Dr. Ewan looked at him over the top of her glasses. She had a way of looking at people that reminded him of his late wife, not unkind, but completely without patience for unnecessary hesitation. "He'll need someone to manage the leg for 6 weeks, keep him calm. Splint changes every 10 days. It's not complicated, but it's not nothing either." Garrison looked at the dog again. "I'll figure it out," he said. He did not name the dog right away. He brought him home in the jacket, set up a shallow box near the wood stove, with an old blanket folded twice, and spent the better part of that first afternoon sitting on the kitchen floor reading the printed sheet Dr. Yoon had sent with him. He read it the way he used to read mission briefs, methodically, twice, noting the details that would matter under pressure. Pain management, weight bearing, signs of infection. He had the medications in a paper bag on the counter and a notebook open on the floor beside him where he wrote things down in his particular cramped handwriting, each line exact. The dog slept for most of that day. Occasionally it would lift its head and look around the room, registering the wood stove, the low ceiling, the hunting photographs Garrison had never taken down because they belonged to the man who'd sold him the house, and taking them down had simply never risen to the top of any list. Then it would lower its head again and sleep. Garrison made soup from what was in the refrigerator. He ate standing at the counter, the way he usually ate, watching the dog through the open doorway. It was the quietest his house had been in a long time, and the strangeness of that realization, that quiet could be broken by something that was itself silent, settled over him slowly, the way cold settles into a room when a door has been left open somewhere. Joanna had been gone for 2 years and 4 months, that she had died of something that had no right to move as fast as it did. A diagnosis in March, a funeral in September, and then a winter that Garrison had walked through like a man completing a task he could not see the end of. His son-in-law Kieran had called every week for the first year. His daughter Priya had driven up from Ottawa twice, each time looking at him with a careful expression he recognized as worry wearing the costume of normalcy. He had told them both, more than once, that he was fine. He was not fine, he knew that. But he had also, in 15 years of operational service, learned that there is a difference between surviving a thing and resolving it, and that the first was possible without the second, even if the second was the only one that actually mattered. He had not yet found a way toward the second. He named the dog on the 3rd day. Not from sentiment, exactly, more from practicality. There were things he needed to say to the dog throughout the day, and calling out "hey" from across the room was starting to feel inadequate. The dog was attentive in a particular way. It listened, and Garrison spoke, even when he was just narrating what he was doing, the quiet commentary he'd started up without quite noticing. The dog would track him with its eyes, ears slightly forward, as though each sentence was information worth filing. He named him Kodiak, was the name of a place he had been, once, a long time ago, on a layover that had nothing to do with anything classified. Just a gray morning in a small Alaskan harbor, the water the color of old pewter, mountains rising straight out of the sea. He had stood on a dock and felt, for about 10 minutes, a stillness so complete it had almost frightened him. He had never told anyone about that morning. It seemed like the right name for a dog he had also not told anyone about yet. 6 weeks is a long time to spend with a dog you were not planning to keep. Or rather, and Garrison would eventually have to admit this to himself, 6 weeks is exactly long enough for a dog to make himself so thoroughly at home in the rhythms of your daily life that the alternative stops being a category you can hold in your mind clearly. Kodiak's leg healed steadily. By week 2 he was putting weight on it with a careful, considering kind of deliberateness, like a man testing ice. By week 4 he was moving through the house with a loping, slightly tilted gait that Dr. Ewan said would probably smooth out over the coming months as the muscle rebuilt itself. By week 6, the day Garrison drove him back for the final check, Kodiak jumped into the truck on his own before Garrison had finished opening the door. Dr. Ewan watched him on the examination table and said, "He's done." "I know," Garrison said. "Strong dog." She ran her hands down the leg with a professional efficiency that Garrison had come to appreciate. Nothing wasted. Whatever he was before you found him, he's decided to be something else. Garrison looked out the window at the parking lot. The first snow of the year had come the night before, still thin on the ground, the way early snow always looked. Provisional, like an idea that hadn't committed yet. "He talks," Garrison said. He hadn't meant to say it out loud. Dr. Ewan looked up. "Not barking," he said. "Different. He makes sounds, like he's trying to get something across." He paused. "My wife used to say German shepherds were the only dogs that actually had opinions." Dr. Ewan was quiet for a moment. "She was right about that," she said. Then, carefully, "When did you 2 years ago? April will be 3. Dr. Ewan nodded. She did not say she was sorry, which he appreciated. He had heard that phrase so many times in the first year that it had stopped meaning anything, worn smooth like a stone that gets passed around too many hands. "He's good for you," she said instead. Garrison picked Kodiak up from the table and set him on the floor. "He's a dog," he said. "Yes," said Dr. Ewan, "that's what I said." It started with the mornings. Garrison had not been sleeping well since Joanna died. not dramatically badly, nothing that would have registered as a crisis to anyone watching from outside. He slept 4 or 5 hours, woke before dawn, lay in the dark, and waited for a reason to get up that was convincing enough to actually move. Most mornings he succeeded eventually. Some mornings it took a while. Kodiak changed this in a way that was almost embarrassingly simple. At 6:15 every morning, without variation, Kodiak would walk to the side of the bed and put his chin on the mattress and make a sound, a low, particular sound, not quite a whine, not quite anything else. It was the sound of a creature who had something on his agenda and considered your involvement in it non-optional. Garrison would open one eye. Kodiak would still be there. Garrison would say, "Give me a minute," and Kodiak would wait exactly 40 seconds before doing it again. By the second week, this had become the structure around which everything else organized itself. Feed Kodiak. Let Kodiak out. Walk Kodiak down the road to the cedar break and back, half a kilometer each way, the cold air coming in clean off the fields and the sky going pale above the tree line. Make coffee. Sit at the kitchen table while Kodiak settled on the floor near the wood stove and watched him with the focused, patient attention of someone who has decided you are worth watching. Garrison started talking to him somewhere around the 4th week. Really talking, not just narrating tasks, but actually saying things. He wasn't sure when the line between one and the other had moved. He said things he had not said to anyone. About the mission in 2009 that he still thought about when the weather was a certain way. About the last conversation he'd had with Joanna, which had been about whether to get the truck's front tires changed before winter, and how the ordinary brutality of that the last real conversation had been about tires, had taken him a long time to make peace with. About the fact that he was not sure what he was doing in this house, in this town, in this particular version of his life. Kodiak listened. He would shift occasionally, readjust his chin on his paws, let out a long breath through his nose. Once, during a longer stretch of silence, he stood up and walked across the kitchen and sat directly in front of Garrison's chair and looked at him for a long moment, then went back to the wood stove and lay down again. It was so deliberate that Garrison laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in a while, and the sound of it in the kitchen was strange enough that he stopped and sat with it for a moment before it faded. Priya drove up in February. She had called ahead, which she always did, and Garrison had said, of course, "Come," the same way he always said it, with genuine welcome underneath the flat delivery that he could not seem to fix no matter how many years passed. That she arrived on a Saturday afternoon in a rental car, wearing the orange parka she'd had since university, and carrying a paper bag of things from a bakery in Ottawa, that she knew he would eat without comment, but secretly appreciate. That she had her mother's eyes, dark and quick and slightly amused by everything. And Garrison had to be careful sometimes not to look at her directly for too long, because it still caught him off guard. She came through the door and Kodiak was there. He did not jump. He was not, at 8 months old, a dog who jumped at people. He had an almost formal quality to his greetings, standing at a respectful distance and waiting to be acknowledged before moving closer. But he made the sound, the particular one, standing in the hallway looking at Priya with his ears forward and his tail doing a slow, dignified wave. He made a sound that was somewhere between a greeting and a question. Priya stopped. She looked at the dog. She looked at her father. "Dad," then, she said. "You have a dog. Found him in November," Garrison said. "You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now." Kodiak made the sound again. Priya dropped onto one knee and held out her hand, and Kodiak walked forward and put his nose against her palm with the seriousness of someone completing an important transaction. Then he made a different sound, shorter, softer, and Priya laughed in a way that Garrison recognized. It was Joanna's laugh, the one that came out when something genuinely surprised her. She stayed for the weekend. Garrison made the lamb stew that had been Joanna's recipe, from memory, which he had made every winter for 30 years. They ate at the kitchen table, Kodiak under the table between their feet, and talked for longer than they usually talked. About Kieran's new job in Hamilton, about the Petawawa winters, and whether Garrison had thought any more about the knee surgery the doctor in Ottawa had been recommending. About small things, ordinary things, The kind of conversation that is not about what it is about, that is actually about the fact of two people being in the same room and not wanting to be anywhere else. At some point in the evening, Kodiak stood up and put his head in Priya's lap, and she put her hand on him without looking down and kept talking. Garrison watched this happen. He did not say anything. After she went to bed, he sat in the kitchen for a while, with his coffee and the dog for company. The wood stove ticked. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving through the cedars in a low, continuous sound that he had never quite gotten used to. Not unpleasant, but present. The way the land in this part of Ontario was always present, always making itself known. He thought about Joanna. He thought about the tire conversation. He thought about how she had never been afraid of ordinary things. How she had moved through daily life with a kind of cheerful practicality that he had not understood until it was gone. How it had taken him 2.5 years to see that what he had mistaken for simplicity in her was actually a form of wisdom he had never been trained for. Kodiak put his chin on Garrison's knee. "I know," Garrison said. He wasn't sure what he was responding to. Maybe just the weight of it. The fact of another living thing choosing to be next to him at the end of the day. He put his hand on the dog's head and sat there until the wood stove went quiet. Spring came late that year, the way it does in the Ottawa Valley. Grudgingly, in fits and retreats, snow still on the shaded side of the woodpile into the first week of April. But it came. By March, Garrison had started walking farther. He had found a trail along the river, 3 kilometers in and 3 back, that he and Kodiak did on mornings when the ice allowed it. Kodiak had by this point developed a fully articulated running commentary on the world. A vocabulary of sounds that Garrison had, somewhat embarrassingly, begun to catalogue. There was the sound for "I have found something interesting that requires your attention." There was the sound for "I know you said we were going home, but I am not in agreement with that decision." There was a higher, briefer sound he made when something startled him, a grouse lifting from the brush, a snowmobile on the far field, that was so perfectly expressive of dignified alarm that Garrison had, on more than one occasion, said, I see it," before he could stop himself. He had told Kieran about the dog during a phone call in January, and Kieran had said that was great. That was really great. With such undisguised relief in his voice that Garrison had felt a small pang of something. Not guilt, exactly, but an awareness of how much the people in his life had been watching and waiting for something to shift. April, just before the 3rd anniversary of Joanna's death, Garrison drove to the cemetery in Pembroke for the first time since the headstone had been set. He had not been able to go before. He was not sure he could have explained exactly why. Not grief, or not only grief. More a stubbornness about certain kinds of ritual, a resistance to standing in front of a stone and feeling something at a time and place designated for feeling it. He left Kodiak in the truck. He stood at the stone for a while. He didn't speak. He had never been a man who spoke to the dead, and he wasn't going to start. But he stood there and let the silence be what it was. And for the first time in 3 years he did not feel, underneath the grief, that particular layer of bewilderment. The stunned, helpless bewilderment of a person who has survived something they were not prepared to survive. That layer was still there, but it was thinner now, and he could see through it a little to what was on the other side. He drove back on the highway with the windows down because Kodiak liked the air, and Kodiak stood with his front paws on the door, and his ears flattened and his whole face pointed into the wind with an expression of complete, uncomplicated joy that had no past and no future in it and was entirely the property of that moment. That specific speed, that specific road, that specific cold spring air coming off the Ottawa River, and the sound of the tires on the pavement, and the particular angle of the afternoon light. Garrison watched him out of the corner of his eye. He thought, "You have no idea what you did." He thought, maybe that's exactly why it worked. Priya came back in June with Kieran, and they stayed for a week. Kieran was a good man. Quiet, careful, the kind of person who noticed when a shelf was loose and fixed it without asking, who offered to split firewood and meant it. He and Garrison had always had the affectionate, slightly formal dynamic of two people who loved the same person and had organized their relationship largely around that shared fact. They had been finding in the past year some new footing. It was gradual and real. Kodiak decided within the first hour of their arrival that Kieran was trustworthy. He demonstrated this with his highest honor. He brought Kieran a tennis ball, and then sat in front of him with a focused, expectant expression until Kieran threw it, and then made the sound that meant, "I am choosing to approve of you." Kieran threw the ball 11 times. On the 12th, he looked at Garrison, sitting on the porch steps watching this, and said, "This dog is something." "He is," Garrison agreed. That evening, the three of them had dinner on the back deck. The first warm night of the year, the field behind the house gold in the late light. Kodiak lay under the table between Priya and Garrison, his weight distributed precisely to touch both of them. At some point, Priya looked down at him and then at her father, and she said, without making it a big thing, "I think Mom would have loved him." Garrison considered this. "She would have complained that he was too noisy," he said. Priya laughed. "And then talked to him for 4 hours every morning," Garrison said. "She would have given him a whole different name. She was always renaming things. She renamed the cat 3 times. They were quiet for a moment, but it was the kind of quiet that holds something gently rather than pressing down on it. The field was going purple in the fading light. Somewhere in the cedar brake, a bird was doing its evening routine, the same phrase repeated with small variations. Kodiak made a sound, the soft one, the low one, the one that meant nothing in particular except that he was present and aware and had chosen, for reasons entirely his own, to stay. Garrison put his hand on the dog's back. "There are things that heal you that do not ask your permission first. They simply arrive. At the edge of a ditch on a frozen November morning, at the side of a bed at 6:15, with something specific on their agenda, at the exact moment when the silence has gone on long enough that something needs to change. They do not know they are doing it. That is perhaps the point. The knowing would get in the way." Garrison Holt had spent 15 years being the kind of man who walked toward the difficult thing without flinching. He had learned over the course of one long northern winter that sometimes the difficult thing walks toward you. Sometimes it weighs 12 pounds and can't keep its opinions to itself. Sometimes it is waiting in a ditch on County Road 26, shaking in the dark, not going anywhere. Waiting, as it turns out, for you.